This morning, I'm delighted to say Oliver Dean, political commentator, and Adam Dale, who's also a political commentator. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Let's talk about something completely different for a change. Now, according to this in the Telegraph, white British people will become a minority in the UK population within the next 40 years. This is according to a new report. They've been looking at migration, birth and death rates up to the end of the 21st century. They predict that white British people will decline from their current position, which is 73% of the population, to 57% by 2050, which actually is not very far away. This is research done by Matt Goodwin, friend of this programme. It shows that by the end of the century, the white British share of the population could have fallen to 33.7%, which is a whopping drop. It shows a big rise in the proportion of the UK population comprising foreign-born and second-generation immigrants from below 20% to 33.5% within the next 25 years. And by 2100, 60% in the UK will not have been born in the UK or will have at least one immigrant parent. Also, the Muslim population will go from 7% to more than 11.2% in the next 25 years, and it will be 19.2% by the end of the century. Oliver, should we be concerned?
Well, firstly, David, good morning to you.
Good morning.
I am hesitant to say whether we should be concerned because I don't know fully how Matt Goodwin's come to these conclusions. I don't know, the
But let's say
research
they're accurate.
Well, yeah, but that's a big assumption, and that's obviously going to assume that current trends,
continue. Yes.
Yeah, current trends continue.
Okay, let's say current trends continue, and this is accurate.
But this thing, right? Because we're going into all of these hypotheticals. We're assuming.
Well, this is his research. This is what he shows. I'm asking you, based on this research, if this is right, is this a concern?
But that is a big question as to whether.
But that's why I'm asking the question.
But we don't know whether it's right.
I don't care. The point is, I'm asking you, if this is right, and that's what I want you to answer, if this is right, are you concerned?
No, but the question is whether it is right in the first place. This is assuming a number of different things that are going to continue going in the direction they're going. This is irrelevant as to what, whether the government's going to change its policy on immigration.
But you're now hypothecating. I want an answer to that question.
But the answer relies on these hypotheses and these assumptions that are being made.
No, it doesn't.
Of course it does.
It doesn't. So let's say that these are right, and we get to
But that is a massive assumption.
I don't
to say,
care.
But that's
the question.
important.
If this is right,
but that's a massive assumption to make. You're assuming that these things are just going to continue the way that they're going. You're assuming that this research is correct. We don't know whether it's correct.
Okay, let's say it does happen like this.
But
are you concerned?
You can't just keep saying.
Okay, I'm not getting any sense out of you at all, Adam.
I'll give you a straightforward answer from my opinion, which is, why should we be that concerned by it?
Oh, don't ask me. I'm asking you. What's wrong with you two this morning?
I don't think that there's necessarily... Again, I agree with the sentiment that I think they're quite dubious figures, to be honest. I think they're just sort of headline-grabbing research.
Matt Goodwin is known. he is known as an academic. He's at Buckingham University. He will have done a lot of research to get to this.
Yeah.
But what we are seeing is that we're seeing the indigenous population, or the white indigenous population, tends to have fewer children. And so, therefore, it stands to reason that you do tend to get immigrant families, second-generation, third-generation immigrant families, who have a higher birth rate. And actually, it feeds back into Nigel Farage saying to remove the two-child benefit cap.
But I don't actually think the actual source of where these people come from necessarily is a negative. Because if you look at this from other migration waves across different periods, Irish, my partner has got Irish descent. They don't actually count. Well, yeah, probably in some shape or form, but they don't actually count in this research as white British. And they pretty much are. They're exactly the same as me. It's just that they have a slightly different ancestry. So they are assimilated into this society.
So why does he say these findings are certain to spark a considerable degree of anxiety, concern and political opposition?
I think it's the kind of classic fear-mongering that we've seen in previous generations, where you get a headline, you go, oh, our type of person is declining, someone else is increasing, it's massively a bad thing. It doesn't take into account that people assimilate into English culture just because their background is from somewhere else.
Well, it feeds rather beautifully, doesn't it, to the front page of the Sunday Telegraph here. Yeah. So Kemi Badenoch saying, let bosses ban burqas. We were talking about Sarah Pochin, of course, asking that question. Keir Starmer didn't even bother to reply to it. It's clearly an issue. It was an issue for her constituents as well. It is a lack of integration that I think is underpinning all of this, because, and I know this from living in East London, you've got people living in silos who are not integrating, who are not mixing, who don't share British values. I think that's a problem.
I think there's a bigger point to be made here, and that's that, Kemi Badenoch's come out and said this in an exclusive interview with the Telegraph.
Yes, amongst other things.
Well, amongst other things, yeah. But this was all done because, you know, a Reform MP stood up in the House of Commons and asked a question. And there was this amazing cartoon in the Times a few weeks ago, and it was Nigel Farage playing the Pied Piper, and then everybody else is dancing to his tune. And what we're seeing is Nigel Farage isn't even in power. He's leading a party that has, what, 5 MPs in the House of Commons? And yet the second largest party in the House of Commons is having to dance to that and having to listen to that and respond to that.
Having
and come
to?
out. Pardon?
Having to?
Well, I think, no, absolutely, she is having to. And we're seeing more and more from the Conservative Party, specifically under Kemi's leadership, is this lurch to the right, and they're trying essentially to be a light version of Reform. You know, this, I don't want to say, you know, but like, it's almost semi-version of Reform. They're going to, you know, not go fully to the way that Reform are going, fully to the right, but, you know, they're willing to go partially to that. And we saw with James Cleverly coming out the other day, being in support of net zero, we see this kind of breakaway. And I think there's an argument.
So he's tacking left.
I think. Well, I don't want to say he's tacking left. I think he's tacking towards the centre ground. And, you know, we know that elections are won in the centre. You have to have, the most amount of voters are in the centre ground. And James Cleverly's been very tactful in the way
that's a
he's
really
done
interesting point. Certainly in the past they have been in the centre. I'm not sure that's so true.
Voters or
I think voters are changing because, and it goes back to this story, which is that they are seeing a country which is almost unrecognisable to them, and many people don't like it.
But at the same time, though, you've got, you know, we know for a fact that the Tories have lost considerable amounts of voters to, for example, Lib Dems, to independent candidates in the southwest.
But isn't that because actually it wasn't one party, it was actually 5 parties?
What, you mean the Conservatives? Well, yeah, but at the same time, you know, there are great numbers of voters that need to be won back in the centre ground, in the centre-right ground. And the more Kemi continues to move to the right to basically try and mimic Reform, the more that she's going to lose those voters. OK,
let's go back to facts here. White British pupils are now the minority in 1 in 4 schools in England. This is according to official data, so this is not just extrapolation. This is census that's been collected from 21,500 primary schools and secondary schools, show that a quarter of them, the majority, is ethnic minority or white non-British. In 72 schools, no white British pupils are recorded, and in 454 they make up less than 2% of the student body. The shift is biggest in cities, as you would expect, like London, Birmingham, Manchester, Bradford and Leicester. In Birmingham, for instance, not one of the 1,084 students were recorded in the census as white British, whilst just 12 of the 2,779 pupils at Loxford School in Redbridge, which is in London, were white British. Is it a problem if you don't have multiculturalism, if you don't have any representation from white kids in these schools, that again is a problem for integration?
I agree with this, the idea that we need to integrate, and there's an issue with that, with returns to immigration. But actually, these are, again, we're cherry-picking figures out of...
Well, we're not. This is fact.
I'm not saying, disputing if it's fact or not. What I'm doing is I'm saying we're equivocating between schools that are very much mixed versus very much not mixed. I mean, what's the answer? Do we segregate schools? I mean, we're not going back to that kind of...
No, I'm not suggesting that, but I will then throw back at you, by the end of the century, 6 in 10 people in the UK will not have been born in the UK or will have at least one immigrant parent. 1 in 5 will be Muslim. Now, I'm just asking, is that a problem, or do we just say, look, this is the changing nature of the world, we have an interconnected
globalised world, right?
Yeah, well, that may be the answer.
I mean, you can't stop population shifts unless you do it by force, and that's a horrible thing to contemplate, even doing anything near to by force. Things naturally change. We can't expect to just be, as we are statically, white British, consistently forever. It's just not a thing. People change, people move to different countries. I mean, if you look at what is white British, realistically.
But it's very interesting that we're seeing the marked demographic change in this country far more than in other European countries.
I mean, look, I'm going to be hesitant to say that I'm concerned, but if there is this argument that, you know, we need more integration, but at the same time there are schools that aren't even having, you know, any white students at all, I think that is a problem in terms of the community, in terms of actually making sure people grow up together, live together, aware of different cultures, and I think that needs to be addressed.
And that's underpinned by Nick Harrison, who's the chief executive of the Sutton Trust social mobility charity, saying the white working class underachievement is a ticking time bomb for equality of opportunity in our country. I think that is right. Well, I'm deeply worried about white working class boys and being sort of put on the scrap heap of life.
And I think that's partly to explain why Reform are doing so well with young white men in particular. I
mean, it's interesting actually, because Reform has supporters from all ethnicities actually.
Yeah. But we've seen through polling, we know that white people are predominantly more likely to support reform. We know that from young people, particularly from the 18 to 24 range, the amount of young men who are willing to support reform is about 3 times as high as the amount of young
that's a very
women.
Good point.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because I think young men, and particularly young
and they're not
men,
working class men. These are
well, yeah, but most of them are working class men. I think a lot of that is to go down to the fact that there's not really, they don't feel like they have much of a stake in society. If we look at things like the housing crisis, they can't even buy a house. They're putting all of their money on rent, and that's going down the drain. They can't get a job because the job market's in whatever state it's in.
Yeah.
Why would they want to continue supporting this system that hasn't worked for them? When Reform are coming around and saying, look, we've got this radical new solution. We've got all of these things that will fix the system for you and make you feel like you're important, and that's appealing to a lot of young men.
And any thoughts on that? I mean, it is interesting. I find it fascinating how many young people are coming to Reform, not necessarily of their own volition. It's not like they've been sort of handcuffed and made.
Yeah, I think people are, let's say, angry, right? They're angry with the situation.
Yeah.
I think you see this classically through history, actually. If there's a bad period, a downturn in the economy, which there has been for quite a while, due to external factors and internal factors, what happens is people shift to a more complain side of politics. They would rather go for something new.
Or I might say more activist.
Potentially. I mean, activist is, you can see it on both sides. We actually had a conversation outside about this, which was, I find I have more in common with someone on the left of a Conservative Party than I do with the left of the Labour Party, from where I stand.
How interesting. So you're a centrist.
I found out that basically I'm becoming more of a centrist.
That's because you're getting older. Right, gentlemen, thank you for the moment. Hi, David. I'm a PE teacher in a primary school in Plaistow in East London. Out of roughly 850 pupils, only 25 of them are white British. They tell me they are lost and never have their beliefs celebrated. Food for thought. This is Weekend Breakfast. So we're in the middle of the Future Politics panel with Oliver Dean and Adam Dale, and it's been pretty spicy so far this morning. Let's now move and talk about this story, which is in the Sunday Times. It's also in the Sunday Telegraph as well, and this is about Reform and Zia Youssef. Zia Youssef is returning to Reform UK just 48 hours after resigning as the party's chairman. He's going to take up a new role. He will no longer be chairman of Reform UK. He said, he's 38 years old, he said his decision to quit was a mistake. It was the result of exhaustion and working for 11 months without a day off. So he is coming back. He is going to do 4 jobs. He won't have an official title, allegedly, although I imagine he will at some point. He's going to run the Doge unit to root out the wasteful spending, particularly in the councils like Kent, for example, where Reform did very well in the local elections. He will also have a stake in policy making, fundraising and media appearances for the party. Now, Nigel Farage said he's realised that actually the weight, the burden that Zia had on his shoulders is far too much, so they're going to split his former role, that chairman role, into a front-facing chairman who will be touring the country, looking after the voluntary party, also the professional party, and a deputy in charge of organisational matters. They're going to bring in someone to run the party's finances, to help Nick Candy, its treasurer, with fundraising. Nigel Farage is going to be in Port Talbot tomorrow, and apparently those 2 appointments will be made by Tuesday. Just in terms of Reform, obviously I've mentioned it is growing and rapidly and everything. How damaging has this been, do you think? I
think this showcases a very clear truth, and that's that Reform is not a serious party, nor could it be considered.
Why do you say that?
Because the fact that, you're chopping and changing leaders, and I know you're going to be quick to point out, well, the Conservatives did the same.
Well, they had 7 chairmen.
No, well, they had
in 3 years.
But look, this is not, they're playing politics. We don't know why he left in the first place, and then suddenly two
he
days
said
later,
it's because I was tired.
Well, oh come on, I think we both know that that's not entirely true. He said he was tired and then comes back 2 days later. It's just constant, it's just a soap drama. It's
why?
Like,
well, why is it? What's the rest of the soap drama?
Well, what do you mean? Like, and now we're coming out, we're seeing, for example, Nigel Farage's spending commitments the other week. He's pledged more than 70 billion in terms of spending commitments, and yet there's no way to pay for it. He said that 27 billion is going to come from DEI cuts when 7 billion is going to come from DEI cuts when total government
he's going to abolish net zero.
When total government expenditure on DEI is only 27 million. He said he's going to abolish net zero, which is apparently going to bring in money to the Treasury, but data analysis from the Institute for Government shows that the majority of net zero funding comes from the private sector, not the public sector.
I'm not sure that's true.
I mean, we can dispute that, but that is fundamentally true. What's clear is that, he's a leader who relies on sound bites. It's a party that relies on headlines. There's no real policy behind it, and they're just not a serious party of government.
Are they a serious party of government?
I tend to agree with most of what he's actually said. I think it's been very eloquently put. I actually find that Yusuf returning, it smacks a little bit of throwing your toys out the pram and then basically getting what you want by coming back.
Well, did he get what he wanted? I mean, he's come back in a very different role.
I think he's negotiated quite successfully with Farage, and I think this speaks to what the true issue is of Reform Party, which is its centralised power at the top amongst a few people, and it needs to be democratised.
I'd argue the Labour Party is pretty centralised.
Well, they have their own constituencies that have council votes and...
Well, sure, so does Reform. It's won local elections, it's got 5 members of Parliament. I mean, remember, it is a very young party. It's been a meteoric ascendancy.
It needs... These are the sort of things where it becomes a little bit grey.
Aren't they teething problems?
Are they teething problems or are they terminal? That's the question.
You think it's terminal?
I think this
Even
sort of...
Even though the Reform
power,
is polling at 31%?
I think this sort of power play will not play well with the British public. These sort of things, these.
That's interesting.
I mean, it reflects quite heavily, like Musk and Trump. Do we want another version of that, where people are just fighting at the top and it's disruptive, it's damaging?
Okay. Do you think it will change the poll ratings?
I don't know, but I would say that, again, if this type of drama continues, and we've got 4 years until a general election, they're going to be plagued with more problems. We already had the problems with Rupert Lowe a few months ago. It seems to be symptomatic of Reform's internal structures and structural problems, and I think it would be incredibly unlikely for them to be able to go 4 years without suffering another one of these setbacks. And I think it's going to get to a point where the British public are just going to turn around and say, this clearly isn't a party that's fit for government. Time and again, they've got these internal problems and power struggles.
Do you think the Conservatives are fit for government?
I think the Conservatives, in their current form, no, because I don't think they've got necessarily the right...
Do you think the Labour Party is fit for government?
No, absolutely not. No. But I think, and I say this as a member of the Conservative Party, I think that, if we actually put forward proper policy initiatives, if we put forward proper solutions instead of just pushing on culture war issues, then we could show the British public that we're ready for government again. But I think Reform...
But they're miles away. They're polling... What, in the last by-election, they got 6%?
But again, the solution isn't Reform, though, because there seems to be this idea that,
Why did 31% of people want to vote for Reform, then?
Well, hold on. Just because 31% of people, that's, Westminster voting elections, we saw in the Scottish by-election they came third.
Yes, and this was from nothing.
But this was after Farage went up and said, Scotland needs reform, Scotland are going to turn to reform. That's clearly not indicative.
But they beat the Conservative Party.
Well, the Conservative Party has been lost in Scotland for...
Oh, so, right, okay, very interesting. I would argue Reform did extremely well.
They did do extremely well in the council elections. What you've got to realise is, though, that this isn't an election footing. This is protest mid-government.
Is it?
And you've got to see this as... I find it quite interesting looking at it from my perspective, because I think the Conservatives, the question is, are they dead in the water as they currently stand? And the answer is yes, because actually... basically all of their oxygen is sucked up by Reform. What they need to do, which is what you mentioned earlier about James Cleverly, is the politics is always won in the centre ground, and if the Conservatives keep lurching to the right, they're not going to win the next election.
Just to let you know, Reform was only 1,500 votes behind Labour in that by-election.
Can I just ask you a quick question?
Yes.
When Farage came out with those spending commitments the other day, do you think that was a serious economic policy initiative?
Well, I think it's true of any...
It's a yes or no question.
No, I'm asking the questions. You don't ask the questions. I think it was perfectly acceptable so to do, but it needs fleshing out as the party prepares for an election. You can tell I'm a politician. Right, so let's take a break. We'll continue this conversation after the break. This is Weekend Breakfast.
Keir Starmer himself in the last week has talked about this country being an island of strangers. There's no better way to start to change that than to get rid of such items like a burqa, which is so distinctive and so divisive, and actually quite a threatening thing for British people to pass on the street. I was a magistrate for 20 years, Kevin. If anybody had walked into my courts wearing such an item, proceedings would have been stopped until the item was removed.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk. We're in the middle of the Future Politics panel. I'm joined by Oliver Dean and Adam Dale, both of them giving me grief about everything that I say on anything. Chris in Chester, good morning to you. Chris says, Dr. David, this panel, the ones that are on now, are they conservative because they appear to be too liberals? Thank you for that, Chris. Keep all those messages coming in, please. Now, this is another one. Paul Jones says, is Oliver actually a political commentator or an MP? Just answer the question. See? You're being told off. Right, let's talk about this because it's a really shocking story, actually. An outraged mother has accused the NHS of shocking discrimination after her 8-year-old son was denied vital treatment because he goes to a private school. This mother of an 8-year-old blamed Labour's war on private schools for emboldening NHS managers to deny her child help with a crippling joint condition. So this is the story. So essentially her son was referred to a paediatrician at Kingston Hospital in southwest London. She noticed he was struggling to hold the pen properly. He had some mobility issues, so he was referred to that clinician, to a paediatrician. Now, when he went to the hospital, they made him fill in a form and said, which school do you go to? So she thought, well, that's a bit weird. But anyway, filled it in, and then she got a text message saying the child had been declined a crucial appointment with occupational health therapists, which is really important for his hypermobility issues. She then went to see the GP and said, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Well, they found out the specialist unit had written a letter to the GP saying, we are unable to see the child as we do not provide a service to school-aged children who attend an independent school. We are only commissioned to provide a service to mainstream schools. That is despite the boy's brother already being treated for hypermobility issues, the same condition, being treated at the same hospital. Thoughts?
I think me and you are actually going to be in agreement on this, and I think this is symptomatic of Labour's war on private schools and this idea that, somehow we're divided more by class than other things. I think it's disgusting, quite frankly, that anybody is going to be denied treatment purely because of the school that they attend. And, I share all the sympathies with the mother, and my support goes out to her.
I agree with you, actually.
I think it's a bit of a reach to blame the government for this. I really do. I mean, obviously there are issues with this story particularly, and I don't agree with what's happened. I think everyone has the equal opportunity, should have the equal opportunity to use the NHS.
I don't think we're necessarily saying it is the government. They have said it is.
Finger pointing.
She says it's
but
the government.
That's an emotive thing that she's basically blaming the government for her issues.
Right?
No, it's not right. It's not right at all, and we can all be in agreement on that. Some things are classically not right, and everyone can agree on them.
Is the VAT raid on private schools right?
Yes.
Why?
Why should everything else? I mean, why should one sector be untaxed?
University fees don't have VAT.
I don't think there should be university fees in the first place, but that's a completely different argument. We're kind of skirting round the point, and we're basically wanting to talk about private schools rather than the actual issue here, which is that this person has been badly treated by someone in the NHS. Now that's a flaw, and that's something that needs to be looked at, but for her to point the finger at the Labour government and somehow say that this is a class war is a bit of a reach.
But the issue is the private schools, because these ideas wouldn't have come about, this culture of, oh, well, you go to a private school, you don't go to private school. This wouldn't have come about had Labour not proposed the VAT on private schools and gone forward with it. They've allowed this, they've emboldened them, they've allowed this to happen. And I think they need to take some responsibility.
Well, the government does have to raise money in some shape or form. reform, and if they're going to raise it via...
Because it might not even raise money from it.
But it's an exactly right, actually. It loses money, but it's an ideological battle, isn't it? And the point is that everyone pays taxes, everyone pays for the NHS. Equality of access underpins the NHS.
This goes down to the argument of, do you agree with private schools or not?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
I do think it does.
Because if I go on holiday to Magaluf, am I entitled to universality of treatment in the NHS? Yes. So if I choose to spend my money elsewhere, I still get free care. But just because I send my kid to private school...
I don't disagree. I'm not arguing with that point of the case. My point is, that person has been badly treated and should have been treated by the NHS. They shouldn't have been refused. I'm not disputing that.
But in 15 seconds, isn't this sort of symptomatic of something much bigger that's going on?
Absolutely. I think Labour knew that going into the election. They've played on this class warfare politics, and it's come to fruition in this case here.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Oliver Dean and Adam